For centuries, the English thought they knew where they came from. Romans built their roads. Anglo-Saxons gave them their language. Historians filled in the rest. But when scientists sequenced DNA from hundreds of ancient skeletons across Britain, the results didn't match any of it. Not the Romans, not the Celts, not even the first farmers. Out of every civilization tested, only one truly matched, and it came from somewhere no one expected. Before we continue, comment where you are watching from, like and subscribe. Let's begin. For thousands of years, the story of England's origins seemed straightforward. After the last ice age, small bands of hunter-gatherers moved into the British Isles, eventually replaced by early farmers migrating from Anatolia around 4000 BC. These Neolithic communities built monuments like Stonehenge, cleared forests, and established the first stable societies across Britain. Centuries later, new influences arrived. Celtic-speaking groups spread across the islands, shaping language and culture. Then came the Romans, who conquered much of Britain in 43 AD, leaving behind roads, cities, and written records. After Rome's withdrawal, Anglo-Saxon migrants from northern Europe established kingdoms that would form the foundation of England itself. This layered history became the accepted narrative, each wave adding to the population, not replacing it. For generations, historians assumed modern English people were a genetic blend of all these groups. Archaeology supported it. Artifacts, settlements, and written accounts all pointed to continuity, not collapse. The people who built Stonehenge were thought to be the distant ancestors of those who later spoke Old English. But when researchers began extracting DNA directly from ancient bones buried across Britain, they weren't testing theories anymore. They were testing the people themselves. And the evidence told a very different story. The first results didn't just challenge the timeline, they broke it. When geneticists compared DNA from Neolithic skeletons, the very people who built Stonehenge, to later burials, the continuity historians expected wasn't there. Instead of gradual mixing, the data showed a near-total genetic break. The populations before and after a certain point were fundamentally different. Around 2400 BC, a new group appeared in Britain. Archaeologists had already identified them by their distinctive bell-shaped pottery, copper tools, and burial styles. They were called the Beaker people. For decades, they were treated as just another cultural influence. But the DNA said otherwise. Within a few hundred years of their arrival, up to 90% of Britain's existing gene pool disappeared from the record. Not blended, not diluted, gone. The people who built Stonehenge, who had lived on the islands for over 1,000 years, were almost completely replaced. And that raised a question no artifact could answer. Who were the Beaker people, and how did they transform an entire population so completely, without leaving behind clear evidence of invasion or war? Because whatever happened in Britain wasn't gradual. It was absolute. And it didn't stop at Britain. When researchers expanded the dataset across Europe, the same genetic signature kept appearing. The Beaker people were not an isolated group, they were part of a much larger movement. Ancient DNA from burials in the Netherlands, Germany, and beyond showed the exact same ancestry profile emerging and spreading at remarkable speed. And that profile traced back even further, to a population that had lived thousands of kilometers away on the Pontic-Caspian steppe, north of the Black Sea. These were the Yamnaya, nomadic herders who domesticated horses, built wheeled vehicles, and expanded across Eurasia with a scale and speed that still surprises researchers. Their DNA appears like a signal in the data, cutting across regions and replacing earlier populations again and again. In Britain, that signal arrives with the Beaker culture. But here, where it becomes difficult to explain. Archaeology shows continuity. Settlements remain. Tools evolve rather than disappear. There is no widespread destruction layer, no evidence of a massive invasion. And yet the genetics show one of the most extreme population turnovers ever recorded in ancient history. No single explanation fully accounts for it. Not war, not migration alone, not disease in isolation. Something happened in Britain around 2400 BC that rewrote the population almost completely. And the evidence still doesn't agree on how. The closest thing researchers have to an answer comes from the DNA itself. When the genomes are fully reconstructed, the pattern becomes clear. The Beaker people who arrived in Britain were not originally from the island at all. They carried a genetic profile already mixed with steppe ancestry, descended from the Yamnaya, but blended with earlier European populations along the lower Rhine, in what is now the Netherlands. This wasn't just another migration. It was a transfer of a specific genetic lineage that had already replaced populations across much of Europe, and then did the same thing again in Britain. But this does not prove a violent invasion. The archaeological record still shows continuity. Settlements persist. Cultures overlap. Every step in the chain introduces uncertainty. DNA reveals outcomes, not causes. What it establishes is simpler and more disruptive. The dominant ancestral layer of modern English DNA does not trace back to the builders of Stonehenge, the Celts, or even the Romans. It traces back to a single migrating population derived from the steppe. And if that interpretation is substantially correct, it means the foundation of English ancestry was not formed gradually over millennia. It was replaced rapidly by one incoming group. If that is true, the implications reach far beyond Britain. It means the story most people associate with English origins, the Anglo-Saxons, the Romans, even the Celts, sits on top of something much older and far more decisive. Those later migrations shaped language, culture, and identity. But genetically, they were additions to a foundation already transformed thousands of years earlier. The deepest layer of English ancestry would not come from the people who built monuments, wrote early histories, or ruled kingdoms. It would trace back to the descendants of the Yamnaya, carried into Britain by the Beaker migrations and preserved, in altered form, to the present day. And this pattern doesn't stop at England. The same steppe ancestry appears across much of Europe, linked to the spread of Indo-European languages spoken by billions today. A single migration didn't just reshape one island. It helped redefine an entire continent. Which means this isn't just about where the English came from. It's about how quickly identity can change, while ancestry endures hidden beneath it. In museums across Britain, the stones of ancient graves still sit exactly where they were placed thousands of years ago. Beneath them are the remains of the first farmers, the builders of monuments like Stonehenge, people who shaped the landscape, then almost vanished from the genetic record. And above them, layer by layer, came those who followed. Among them, the descendants of the Yamnaya, migrants whose arrival changed the island so completely that their genetic signature still dominates today. The artifacts remain, the monuments still stand, the story for centuries seemed continuous. But the DNA tells something else. It reveals a break so complete it was invisible to history. A population replaced, an origin rewritten, a past that survived not in records or ruins but in molecules carried forward through time. And that raises a final question. If the people who built Britain's most iconic monuments are not the primary ancestors of the people who live there now, then how much of history, as we understand it, is built on stories the evidence no longer supports? If this changed how you see history, subscribe for more stories where DNA rewrites everything we thought we knew. We break down the hidden origins of entire civilizations, layer by layer, evidence by evidence. And if you have a theory about what really happened in Britain 4,500 years ago, share it below. because the data is still being uncovered, and the story of human origins is far from finished.